welcome everyone to Retail Rendez-Vous, a podcast where technology and retail meet. I'm your host, Melanie Frank, Senior Marketing Advisor at JustIS. Today, we will be talking about retail crime and loss prevention, a really relevant and important topic in the retail industry today. And I'm happy to introduce our guest speaker, who is an industry expert in loss prevention, Rui Rodrigues of RUCA Consulting, who is also the Executive Advisor on Loss Prevention and Risk Management for the Retail Council of Canada. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Melanie. It's great to be here.
So before we jump into our topic of discussion, can you give us a quick introduction of yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. So it's Rui. Been in Canadian retail for 30 years. I hate to say that, but it's been that long. I've worked at a variety of retailers from Eaton's, which many people may or may not recall, to HBC, Best Buy, Shoppers Drug Mart, Holt Renfrew, Staples. So I've covered the retail sector, different verticals, different type of formats, as well as supply chain. A couple of years ago, decided it was time to break out on my own, started a consulting firm to be able to work with retailers more holistically on specific issues. And also joined, as you mentioned, the RCC as their executive advisor for LP and risk management. So today I have my own practice for consulting, but focusing in on retail and supply chain in the areas of loss prevention and risk management.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Really great. Okay, so let's jump right in. Today's hot topic is loss prevention. So proven strategies to combat rising retail crime. So we all know that in recent years, retailers have been dealing with an unprecedented level of shrink. Since the beginning of COVID, shoplifting and organized retail crime has substantially increased. We've seen social pressures like inflation and job losses and supply uncertainty has meant that crimes really become more attractive. And it's open a void for organized criminals to exploit. And we're seeing that percentage of sales eaten by fraud and theft and other kinds of loss has really continued to increase year after year. And with the surge now in retail cybercrime, retailers are starting, I see it, I've heard it, that they're starting to feel overwhelmed by this and trying to safeguard themselves against this loss. So my first question to you, Rui, is what are some of the most concerning issues or challenges that retailers are facing today when it comes to loss prevention, and how has loss prevention evolved over the years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, you touched on, through COVID, many retailers who had their shops closed may have experienced, historical shrink improvements, obviously, because the stores were retail locations were locked.
Right.
Whereas others, obviously, the grocery, pharma were not essential services. So those saw, as you said, an increase of loss, but the increase of crime and aggression that has come, and that's been dictated a lot through economic times, a lot of different factors that have impacted that. There's been quite a bit more of the mental health issues coming out, addictions and so forth. But with people going through rough times, being willing to purchase from black market and the economic downturn and people going through struggles, it's driven the organized crime groups to be able to have more channels they can sell through social media, through e-com platforms that they create that are fraudulent. So I'd say that the biggest concerns retailers are facing right now is the increase of aggressive, violent behavior at a physical location that their frontline workers are seeing. That's unprecedented. And that's grown through COVID with people's comfort levels, but it isn't going away. It continues. The other is with the explosion of e-com growth and different ways to sell to your customer, this BOPUS, buy online, pick up in store, curbside, delivery, these last mile channels. It's created the opportunity for organized criminals to also take advantage of those ways to connect with their customers. So the demand for stolen merchandise has certainly increased as well. And of course, the channels through which everybody can sell, including the criminals, has created that ability as well.
Yes, so the criminals are reselling the stolen items online, and it's really hard to track, correct?
Yeah, and it's make it more criminals can come out of the woodwork, right? The organized retail crime professionals that have been stealing in brick and mortars and online continue to do it. But it's those that were maybe concerned about getting caught. Now you can commit crimes from anywhere. And we see organized crime gangs really leveraging some of the more unfortunate folks, again, whether it's folks that are drug habits. So we see these spree of professionals really leveraging folks with an addiction to put in orders with them. Go steal me this, I'll give you X amount of money. So they've also increased their ability to leverage their distribution, keeping themselves relatively safe because they're not the one committing the crime of theft. But then they're obviously selling it online into different channels. So you're not also at the risk of somebody having to come to your fence. A fence would be, retail location that we know is set up with stolen merchandise. Now you can just have somebody go on your social media account, order online, ship it to them, ship it to a post office box, and you're staying relatively hidden behind the scenes. So it's just allowed more criminals to feel comfortable with committing the criminalities and knowing that they can get away with it. So it's really an uphill battle for retailers, but as well as police to deal with it.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, it's an added cyber crime. It's definitely added another level and layer to retail crime for sure. There's a lot of talk, a lot we can talk about actually around loss prevention if we focus on the technology and what role does it play in loss prevention in both the physical and online stores. Is there a need for specialized technology for each, and what type of technology can safeguard retailers?
Yeah, so I've been around quite a bit, Melanie, and there's some really intelligent loss prevention professionals out there that are very good in the fraud space, whether it's at physical locations or online. But everything's just gotten so quick, so it's very difficult for one or two individuals to keep up with it. And the name of the game is to try to prevent as much as possible. So really, it's leveraging the technologies and the evolution of technology over the last 5-6 years around machine learning and now artificial intelligence that a lot of exception-based software offers. Retailers should have those tools in place both at physical store and in their online marketplace to really be looking at the transaction velocity, where those transactions are originating for, if it's online, and having good metrics to have their fraud queue, deferring things that are suspicious to have somebody review, and leveraging systems to spit those things out. The great thing about large data, when you have, speaking about online, is the system can start to look for those anomalies. It doesn't have to impact your customer service, because if I order online today, you really want to still have the speed of shopping online, get to the card checkout, but the merchandise isn't going out till later, tomorrow, maybe a few days, depending on how the customer chooses to check out. So if you divert suspicious transactions based on using the machine learning or some of the intelligence in the software, and then interact with a real person that can, instead of looking at all the data, looking at just those exceptions, they can take on measures like contacting the customer, offering the service of, hey, just want to confirm this order with you, doing those touch bases before that item actually leaves. The other part I would touch on in the space is having the technology also to look at the returns element of this, not just the shopping and the purchase side, because we've also seen a great emergence in return fraud.
Right.
And there's the typical, we talk about porch piracy and things of that nature, people stealing packages from people's porches, corridors, things of that nature. That's just with the explosion of online delivery. But it's also a new phenomenon over the last couple of years where we have folks advertising themselves on social media to help people commit return fraud. They've learned the skills, the sets, the internal measures of organizations on how to speak to the call center to get those returns. So they're offering their services to customers to say, hey, I can get your return for your item. You keep it, I'll get you the money back, but I take 30%. So it's created all these other opportunities. Wow. So organizations really have to be sensitive, not just to the selling side, but also monitor, where are the returns coming from? Is there a habitual person returning? Is it a habitual IP address, a certain postal code? And start to target on those areas and then put in place other measures to make sure they're screening.
Really great advice. But understanding that there are a variety of technologies right now that retailers can implement. There's video surveillance, there's item tags, there's alarms, there are mirrors. If we were to focus on just one in the in-store POS, what key functionality should retailers be looking for in that system to help them combat the inventory shrink? And that can be from even their own internal staff. You mentioned the returns as well. So what are the key functionalities they should be looking for?
Yeah, and I would always start with, one, a retailer's appetite and understanding their losses, and starting from an ROI perspective, right? There's a lot of technology out there, and you can certainly invest in a ton of things to try to mitigate your losses as much as possible. So retailers of all sizes should always start from a place of information. What are our losses? And what are we trying to recover? What impact do we want to have? So if the losses are significant, retailers that have very sexy products, desirable products, if we're focusing in on the POS, it's looking at, the integration between your CCTV, hopefully in this case you have it, your POS systems, and adding in some software into POS that is working with CCTV. For example, if you're doing a traditional counter where you scan out, or you have self-checkouts, is being able to have cameras set up at a proper angle to monitor what's coming to that counter, counting those items, and then making sure that as they're rung through POS, there is corresponding quantity. Therefore, if I'm a customer and 5 items come to a self-checkout, it should alert that 5 items were scanned and that POS transaction has 5 items. It's only 3 or 4. Somebody's bagged something without scanning it. There should be alerts to that. Now, if you have somebody at a self-checkout, you could leverage that person to interact, but you could also manage that to look at after the fact, unfortunately. But similar with a checkout where you have somebody working, it's unfortunate, but there are things called sweethearting. There is employee theft. There's sometimes, collusion that occurs, but also coercion, where some people come in, or organized crime, they may work with employees or threaten employees, or they are working together, and they'll mimic going through the POS to actually purchase everything. But if they're working with an employee, obviously only certain items are getting paid for. Maybe the most expensive, most desirable items are not. So that's one way, integrating the CCTV with your POS. If you want to take it another level, and again, you got to look at the cost and is there a return on that investment? It's leveraging product technology. Whether it's RFID tags or different type of tags on product, especially high-end merchandise, so that when it does come to the counter, the camera has that information, that it reads that, okay, that chip is at the counter, therefore next I expect it to be scanned and sold. If not, again, it creates an exception and alert that somebody can quickly intervene, look at the video and see what occurred. But also within the store, before it comes to the counter, there's a lot of technologies, whether it's locking things in showcases, but also product protection, technologies to monitor what comes off the shelf so that we know an item is in movement, and can create those alerts, especially for the high risk. So there's a lot of great technology that can be used. A lot of it is about integration. So for retailers, it's really making sure they understand the scope of work, that when you start to get down this path of integrating technologies, got to get your IT on board, have a good map of how this is all going to work. And I would add a caveat here, Melanie, that it's all great, but you have to do something with the information, right? There's a lot of great technology. Part of investing it and you use it, you have to have a plan on what you're going to do with all this information, because all this exception, all this reporting, if you don't have somebody looking at it, working with it in real time and mitigating it, you're really always reacting, and then you're reacting a lot. Versus trying to leverage the information. So it's scalability to make sure, if you're using the alerts at the self-checkout or at the counter, or product movement from high-risk areas, that there's some mechanism to intervene before the theft occurs, or for somebody to intervene very quickly after the fact to crunch that data, understand the issue, look at how often something is happening, and then implement solutions. It could be policies, procedures, change on product handling, dealing with an employee if it's employee theft, but reacting that so it's understood that the technology is indeed adding value.
So what advice would you give to either a small or even a mid-sized retailer that, because I do know that some of them don't have a specialized department in loss prevention. Are there certain areas of focus that they should concentrate on first?
Yeah, and so as you mentioned, this would be, the large retailers that have the departments
Right.
typically are invested in this and, have the labor or people or to look at it. For the mid and small who may not, to me, it starts with an assessment. It's really assessing your business around where your risks are, where your losses are coming from, and then working to implement the solutions to reduce that, mitigate it, and holding some accountability to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of times, I mean, it's what I do with my clients is, I start with the mid and small that do not have the LP or risk manager or asset protection professionals or somebody who has this expertise to really work with them to assess their risks, understand where their losses are occurring, and then work with them on the solutions. But it's also about, as I said, that accountability. You want to measure that return. Uh, I honestly do not like when folks make an investment because they had a problem, put it in and then forget about it. And 2 years
Right.
later, look back and say, well, what happened? So to me, it's really critical about doing things that are realistic, are going to deliver that improvement that they're looking for. So it starts with, I think everybody's problems are unique to themselves. It could be people issues, it could be product issues, it could be the layout issues. So it's first and foremost starting with that assessment. Retail Council Canada certainly offers a lot of opportunities for members and non-members to go and look at information that is published. Also, if you're a member, networking with other retailers to understand best practices and what works, and that in itself is very good. If you're a mid or small retailer, go check
Right.
out some of the big retailers, see what they're doing, reach out, talk to colleagues. I mean, again, I have to
I was
plug myself here a little bit. Reach out to
No,
folks like
it's
me,
okay. Yeah, I was going to
right?
ask you actually where retailers can go for advice and information and guidance. So absolutely,
Yeah.
yourself, RCC.
Yeah, and there's a lot of folks like myself. I mean, I think I'm certainly one of the best out there who work closely with retailers and hold ourselves accountable to delivering that ROI. So again, it's really about understanding the needs. But if folks don't have the money to spend, there's a lot of, like I said, the RCC. There's information there. It's reaching out, getting connected with others, leveraging folks like me and others to really create introductions within other companies just to go and check out what they're doing. There are plenty out there that are willing to share the non-proprietary solutions. So it's taken investment in time, but really by reaching out through RCC, certainly they can reach out to RUCA and myself. I'm happy to work with mid and small retailers to look at their problems and look for solutions to help. But again, it should be based on ROI. If you're going to invest in something, I always say to retailers of all sizes, measure your ROI. Is the investment delivering out what you are looking for? And if not, do something different. Don't keep that going. So I think there's a lot out there. The other thing I would say, Melanie, is, for especially mid and small, a lot of times it's time factor, right? Some of the mid
Right.
and small, it's either the owners, their managers are doing so many things. They're the operators, the marketers, the sales team, the HR teams. So it's a lot for them to do. And in today's world where the risks are so great, it really does make sense to partner with somebody to come in and help you through this
Hmm.
and set up a program that you can own. You can manage yourself. You don't necessarily need to go hire someone like me, but working with somebody that can say, okay, based on how we are, the people we have, and what we can do, let's put together a program that we can monitor, we can, handle, we can move forward on, and give us some results. Because this environment, unfortunately, is not changing. The criminals physically are getting worse in the visits to online to the brick and mortars, and in
Right.
the online space, as I said, it's just making it easier. And I think this is going to continue as we exit out of COVID.
Yeah.
Interest rates, inflation going up, and things of that nature, the risk of a recession. Economic times are going to continue to be hard, and that's just going to fuel the criminal element. And retailers need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. And they're getting smarter. That's for sure.
They
That's
are,
for
and
sure.
I like to say, Melanie, unfortunately, they seem to be always a bit ahead of
Ahead.
us,
Yeah.
and we like to, mitigate that by getting ahead of them, and that's constantly our challenge. But there's a lot we can do to stifle it. There's a lot we can do to mitigate it. And there's all other kinds of things. Obviously, we're focusing on technology. We've talked about POS. There's a lot retailers can do to look at their physical locations to fortify them, looking at their environment, the neighborhoods they're in, what are others doing, make sure you're not standing out as a target for others. And then in your online space, what are your competitors doing? What is the shopping experience, but how are they locking down that experience and learning for that? Again, making sure you're not left out as a target. Sometimes in this race of owning the customer wallet, owning a share of that wallet, we take risks, but those risks should be calculated. So it's really good to understand, what are my competitors doing? And sometimes you want to be out there doing things to make it easy for your customer, which opens up too much risk. That should be calculated. Yes, the competition is there and customers can shop in many different ways, but you got to mitigate your risk to make sure you can stay in business.
Really great advice. I think that, retail security strategies and technologies have somewhat been keeping pace. I do know that there are, such as yourself, and there's a lot of emerging loss prevention methods that can really help safeguard retailers today from some of the shrinkage. So thank you, Rui. This was a really insightful conversation. I really, really appreciate you sharing your expertise. And I hope our audience knows that they can contact you, definitely, and look into the RCC to get help if they need to. I look forward to speaking with you again and having you on future podcasts.
Thank you, Mel. It's been a pleasure. And again, I hope, I've been in retail for 30 years. I fight for those mid and small retailers, and anything we can do to help, happy to do so.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. You've been listening to Retail Rendezvous, a podcast where technology and retail meet. If you would like to be a guest on Retail Rendezvous, please reach out to marketing@justis.com and be sure to check out any past episodes you may have missed. Thank you for tuning in.